What's up, everybody? Axe Wizard here, working on my game some more. Neurality 3092. Let me jump in and show you what I've done. So you might notice that there's a star in the star system. There's the sun, and you might notice we're casting shadows. You might notice that, like, I also have a laser that was on accident. I have a working laser too. But yeah, we have a working light system. So all of my ships have light occluders on them. It's kind of odd you can drive through the sun right now, but I might make that change to where maybe you take damage if you get too close to the central star. I think that could be kind of cool. But yeah, as of right now, I think the new lighting makes it look really, really good. So I like how that looks. And let's just make this bad boy full screen. Or maximized, rather. There we go. So, there we go. So this is our combat testing system. So you notice that, like, the lasers and stuff also glow just a little bit, which is pretty cool. Yeah. I haven't given any other ships lasers yet, because I just got it working. So if I pick on a ship that I can easily beat, like if I pick on this little guy, I just start grilling him. You can see his shields are going down. It doesn't play any laser sound right now. I literally just got this working pretty much last night, and I've been playing around with lighting and stuff today. So I got the laser beam to work, and yeah, I think having a star in the middle of a star system is really cool. So currently right now all the stars are yellow because I was trying to emulate the sun, but I need to add some sort of option to be able to change that by star system, because you might have blue stars, green stars, red stars, yellow stars, white stars, maybe even black stars, where it's like a weird reverse light effect. That could be super cool. But yeah, so far I think like combat stuff is looking really cool, just because like ships run away from when they're getting low health now. So you see ships are boosting out of there as they're trying to escape. When the ship gets too low health, it will just try to run away. But yeah, I've just been having fun playing this game because it's it's starting to feel like an actual game now, and it looks really cool. Like I love the way the lighting effects work. Come on, there we go. So I'm gonna boost through all the combat here. This should be good. But I like the way that the light shines, like on the planets. Like it just gives a little subtle, and like the closer you are to the light source, the more like the more pronounced the glow effect is, which I also really like. And let me go to my Zenith system over here. There we go. So I think like the glow is a lot more noticeable here. Like, so the shadows casting looks really good, I think. And, you know, the fact I got lasers working is super cool. And just like my projectiles, they don't hit anything that you're not actively targeting. And if you're fighting multiple things, it will collide with the closest thing and only the closest thing. So definitely going to be some good stuff to talk about in regards to the there we go, in regards to the lasers. So see how that guy just took off because he's a freighter. He doesn't want to fight at all. So I'm just gonna light him up, just continue grilling him. Oh, he's about ready to escape. No, he's gone. So right, yeah, the laser just does damage per second basically. So if let me see if I can grill this guy. He's too small to target. Come on. There you go. I got you. Come get it. Come get it, punk. What, you want a piece of me? I got lasers, fool. Getting grilled. Okay, he's running away. I'm going to keep drilling him. Boom, got him. So yeah, the laser took a little bit of work, but I've mostly been playing with lights. So that's what I got to show. We have stars and star systems, and I think it looks like a big ball of gas that is emitting light, so that's pretty cool. So all of my ships have light occluders on there. That way they block light and they cast shadows, and that was a fun thing to do. And of course, lasers. So that's what I got: stars, lights, and lasers. So let's go into the code review portion. So first things first, let's talk about lighting. So whenever you look at like any tutorial on how to use like glow effects, they always use a world environment node. But what the tutorials don't tell you is that you can only have one world environment node active at one time. So for example, when I was working on my laser, the tutorial just had you attach a world environment node directly to your Raycast 2D, which is odd because, you know, it works if you only have that one and only laser. But as soon as you make another laser, it's going to override that world environment, and it may or may not work with other stuff. And also, like for my star, I wanted to have a glow effect for that as well, because if you look at my star, it's not a very visually pleasing looking thing. But because this scene, if we just play it by itself, like it doesn't look that great. I mean, doesn't look really that good. But because I have the world environment node on my main node, I actually changed the main node to be a world environment from a normal node. Glow effects work. So how glow effects work is if you have, let's go back to my main here. So you can see over here I have this environment and I have glow. So I've got glow set to be enabled. And then here I've got various levels. So what I did is I cranked down the intensity a little bit. I made it like 62%-ish basically is how I look at it. I cranked my strength down just a tad as well because I thought it was a little overpowering. And then I gave it just a little bloom and I changed it from soft light to additive. Now, if I change it to soft light, it looks way different. So it's a very, very faint glow. So for example, you can see like it's kind of changing the color of my ship a little bit to be more yellow because it's a very faint glow. It's a soft light. But if we change this bad boy to additive, then that changes the whole glow effect to be a real, actual bright glow. And look at that. I am engulfed in a star right now. That looks awesome. So additive was the way to go for my blend mode. And then I also made sure to check bicubic upscale, because if you don't check that, the glow looks really weird. So you can see it's looks very cubic, you know? You can see like blurry pixels basically. But if you do the bicubic upscale, it gets rid of that. Now I didn't try to do high quality because it looks okay without it, and after reading this little property, it looks like it would make the actual glow process take twice as long. And I didn't notice any difference between high quality and not, so why take that huge hit to my performance when this looks great? So cool. So we've got our world environment set as our main node. So we have our glow set. So now how do I make things glow? So whenever you want to make something glow, you go to the visibility, and what you want to do is you want to set your self-modulate. So every time I mess with this, it never here, I'm going to screenshot this really quick. That way I can set it back when I'm done. Because every time I click on this, it always seems to like reset, at least in Godot 3.4, which is what I'm using. But you want to set it to be raw. And when you set it to be raw, normally everything here is set to 1. And if you crank it up anything above 1, Anything greater than 1 will emit a glow. So you can see here I've got a pretty strong glow. Like I've got green and red like way over to make like a yellow. So it really glows. Now if I were to yeah, so just set it to for your self-modulate, make it raw, and then anything above 1 will glow. So anything that I want to have glow, I did that too. So for example, like my projectiles, if we go to light cannon projectile here, I have a sprite. In self-modulate, I made sure that everything was set to 3 because the sprite was already colored blue, so I didn't really have to do any coloration changes there. So I cranked everything up to 3 from 1, and it gives off a nice glow when it's being fired now, thanks to my world environment. So that's how I was able to make glow work, and I'm pretty happy with how that looks, and it really adds a lot to combat. And yeah, so that's how you do glow. At least that's how I was able to do it. Now let's talk about lighting. So for my star, which is of a type sprite, I added a light 2D node. And for a texture, I just went on Open Game Art, and there's actually this particle pack by Kenny. Kenny does a lot of good, awesome assets. This particle pack, I just picked one of these light nodes here. I think it was this one right here. So I just used that texture for my mask. So what it does is it's like a blending thing to where white will shine brighter, and then as it fades to a black, it goes back to normal, like absence of light, back to what it was. So I downloaded that. Again, it's CC0. I'm going to copy this really quick while I've got this up. And let's go to my main node. And I'm making sure that I'm trying to document all the different things that I've been using that are not my assets. So when I get closer to releasing, I can figure out where all these licensed assets info should go. And so that way I can keep track of all that stuff. So with my light 2D, I just added that texture, which was pretty small. So what I did was I cranked the texture up to like 15 size. So it's like 15 times the size, so it's quite big. And I set the mode to add. And I cranked down the energy just a tad. I cranked it down to 0.8. And I also enabled shadow. So that's all I did for my light settings. And so if I turn this off, the game will look just how it did before, which I think is, after having lighting working, I think it looks pretty bland. But I think having lights really makes it seem so much better. So if we turn our light 2D back on and run it, you know, it looks like I think it just looks so much better. Like this little detail here just looks so good. So now, how do I make stuff cast shadows? So my light has shadow enabled, but how do I tell it for my ships to cast shadows? So this was a bit of a lengthy process, and I spent quite a bit of time learning about light occluders and found some stuff out. So for example, let's take a look at my Synthocracy shuttle, which is my ship that I'm using here. So if you'll notice, over here I've got like 4 occluders. Now why do I have 4? Because I wanted it to be perfect. So I wanted the ship to, like, if a light is shining directly on it, I don't want there to be like a weird shadow. So for example, if I hide these light occluders and we look at, let me see. Let me move this to where it's supposed to go, which is above the sprite. There we go. So if we had just kept something like our collision mask here, you see like there's this area here where it's not really, the ship isn't there, like especially like right here. Those will look really weird. And if a light is shining like from right here, this would be in shadow, which looked really weird. So what I had to do is I had to make separate occluders for every little part that I wanted this to shine. So this needs to be brought in just a smidge. There we go. So I made these light occluders, and the reason why I made multiple is because if you try to do one light occluder and just do like a pixel perfect thing, anytime when you're working with masks and you get into convex shapes, so for example, like if I were to make this go in, this right here, this is a no-no. This is such a computational task, it slows the game down. So what I was doing is, I was first running into this on my Synthocracy freighter, because look at this guy. This has so many areas. If I were to just take the normal collision mask for like projectiles and use that as my light occluder, if a light is shining right here, this was casting a shadow. I got screenshots of it that I'll put up right now, and it looked really bad. It looked awful. And I tried making one single light occluder that was like, you know, going to every section here, and it had like 120 points or something like that, and it was slowing the game down in the editor. Like the particles here were like going at like really choppy. It was such a performance bog that I was like, okay, well that's not feasible to do. So yeah, let's see. I've also been noticing that like sometimes my thrusters aren't on the ships anymore, and I think that was because I changed the particle that was being used from something I drew. So there we go. Change that and turn the shield back on. So what I did is I make light occluders for every little part, making sure that we never have any of those convex shapes. We're always, you know, going outwards. And so that way, every little part you can see has its own light occluder. And I'm just going through and making sure that adding small light occluders to encompass the entire shape is much more easier for the computer to do than one big light occluder that's got like 200 points and a lot of convex shapes. Like that's just going to kill your performance. So yeah, this took a little while because I had to go through and, you know, basically color the ships again by making these shapes around them and all that stuff. But the end result, I think, is worth it because I think it looks so amazing. So you can see, like, as I zoom in, like if I go like right here, you can see like I can't, well, I'll just point. Like you can see like right on my front left wing there, like the shadow is being cast perfectly. Like if I didn't have the stuff right, it wouldn't look good at all. Like all those little dips, those little nooks and crannies are now having light shined on them as they should be. And I think it just adds a lot, and it makes the game feel so much more alive. And especially like when you start getting closer to glow, I like how the light also works with the glow effect to really like make your thrusters and stuff like shine super bright. I think that's really cool. And yeah, I think it just looks awesome. So pretty happy with how that turned out. I'm going to keep it. And I haven't even noticed like a big performance decrease adding lighting either. Especially when I go down to my faction combat system test and I've got a ton of different ships. It seems to all work fine. Like I could still have like 200 ships on the screen at one time duking it out. And the game is still running pretty well. So I'm pretty happy with that. So I think Godot 4 does a lot to improve lighting even further, so that's exciting. But that's how I was able to rig up 2D lighting in Godot 3.4. So that was how I got that work. Now let's talk about some other stuff that we did. So I talked about WorldEnvironment. I swapped main to be WorldEnvironment. I added the sun that emits light, so every star now, every star system has a star at the center of it, which I think is really cool. I added light occluders to every ship. I talked about that. And ships now retreat at 50 health, at 50% health. So let's talk about that. That was a small change. I think that was in mostly AI state intercept and attack. I just added this are we in danger of being destroyed check, and we're just saying, hey, if our hit points don't equal 0, and oh yeah, I make sure that we're not trying to divide by 0, so that's why that's there. So hit points divided by hit point max times 100. So I'm doing a percentage calculation. Your current divided by your max times 100 equals the percentage. And so I'm saying, hey, if you're below 50% health, then run. So I'm just setting state equals retreat and then returning early. So I'm doing that for intercept. I think I'm also doing that for attack. I'm doing that same thing here, and I think I might have that in idle. Yes, I also have it in idle as well. So those 3 move states seems to be enough. Like if we're moving, I already have something to see if we're being attacked already, so I don't need to do that in move. So because they're already moving somewhere, so that should be fine. So yeah, that was another quick little change. It made ships retreat, and I think that adds a lot to the combat, because now you've got ships that are, you know, rushing and trying to boost out of the way, and I think that is super cool. Oh, let's actually talk about state retreat. So what I did for state retreat is I set action boost to be true, regardless of where they are facing. They're just trying to get out of there. I'm also setting their accelerate to be true. I'm making sure decelerate is false. And I'm also making them stop shooting weapons, because if I didn't have this, they would still be shooting while they're like boosting away, and they're not shooting at anything, which looked weird. Their turrets and stuff will still automatically target the nearest enemy and so fire at them, because they're independent weapons. But for your main weapons, you don't want to be doing that. And then I just make them face like the closest point to where they can get out and hyperspace, and I just have them go there. And if they're within 100 pixels of it, then they're going to set their state to hyperspace and they're going to boost out. And we already went through state hyperspace in a different episode, so I'm not going to go over that again. I haven't even touched that since I last did it. So boom. And then let's talk about the biggest change: laser beams. Now, in the game, you know, I've only got the one ship that has a laser beam, and I think it looks pretty good. Super basic. I don't have any particle effects or anything on it. It's just a line 2D that glows. And I can... Oh yeah, I forgot that those guys run, because he's a freighter. So I can shoot this guy with the laser, and you can see it doesn't go through them. It collides with them. So, and it was doing steady damage. So let's talk about how this works. Well, first, let's back up and talk about weapons and projectiles, because it took a lot of work to get lasers to even be usable. So let's talk about weapon slot. So every weapon fits inside a weapon slot, and weapon slots are mounted directly to the ship. So yeah, so we are instancing our weapon when we are created. We're setting the weapon ship owner to be the owner, our owner. Now, if you don't know, owner specifies the owner of the scene you're in. So because weapon slot is part of the ship scene, so if I go and I look at, say, one of my ships here, let's just go look at Synthocracy shuttle again. So you see here up at the top, ship, this is the owner of this scene. So everything that I have here, including this weapon slot, when I say owner, it's referencing this. So it's the owner of the scene. So I'm just setting the owner, the ship owner variable for my weapon slot, and also passing it down to the weapon, which also passes it down to any fired projectiles, so that we don't shoot ourselves, because when we fire a projectile, we don't want it to like just instantly collide with us and deal damage to us. We don't want to do that. So that's why I do that there. So, and this was some of the earliest code that I implemented when I started my Godot port. So there's probably much better ways of doing it, but that's how I've got it working now. So this seems off again. I thought I adjusted this already. Here, let's put this here. Let's put this like right here. And we'll put this here. And then we'll just add another one right here. There we go. That looks a lot better. So let's go back to weapons and stuff here. So now that we've got a weapon, so weapon slots create weapons. So that way, you know, this will allow me to customize my ships to have, you know, you can go and swap out weapons. So for example, if I don't like this laser on my freighter, maybe I want like just an automatic turret. I don't have to worry about shooting stuff. I can swap that out, provided that the weapon I'm adding fits the weapon slot type. So for example, light, medium, and heavy weapons. I can't add a big ass planet destroying laser beam in a light weapon slot. So that was my logic when I did that like months ago now. Yeah. So we have our weapon. So what I had to do is I had to add another type here because I wasn't far along in my thinking. So I already have this variable called weapon type, but what that refers to is whether it's going to be activated as a primary weapon, secondary, or an independent weapon. Because initially how I was envisioning the game was, you know, you would left click to attack, and then you would right click to use your secondary attack, and then your independent weapons would just automatically attack close enemies for you. Well, it's changed since then. So right now I have spacebar to attack, and right now a spacebar fires only primary weapons. I don't think I even have any secondary weapons right now. So I don't have any secondary weapons. So I haven't given any thought onto how I want to handle those. I'm not sure if I want to do something like No Man's Sky does, so where like when you're using your ship, say if you got like 3 or 4 different weapons, you'll have to like toggle between them. Or so for example, if you want to use your lasers or your rockets, you would have to swap those weapons. I don't know if I necessarily like that approach for this game. Because especially if you have like a big capital ship, you're going to have tons of different weapons. And you don't want to be cycling through them when you should be just doing a full onslaught barrage to neutralize the enemy. So yeah, I still need to do some thought on weapon systems, but I just tweaked what I already had. So since I was already using weapon type, I decided to add a variable called projectile type. And this defaults to being set to projectile, which is what all of my weapons were doing before. So when you fire a weapon, it creates a projectile. The projectile goes forward, and if the projectile collides with another ship, it, you know, does damage and then destroys itself. So it doesn't keep colliding or keep going through enemies and dealing a bunch of damage every step or every frame. So I added projectile type so I can handle beam weapons. So I also added some stuff here. So for example, damage minimum and damage maximum. When we're doing a beam weapon, we don't want to do like a damage range because it's going to continuously keep hitting, and that would be very weird damage. So what I did is if our projectile type is going to be a beam, then I expect damage minimum and damage maximum to be symmetrical, like they should be the same. So if your light cannon does like 3 to 5 damage and your light beam, you know, you want it to do say 10 damage per second, that's a steady rate. So this if beam min and max should be the same, and should be total damage in a second. So damage per second, DPS. That was my thought process there. So, and then I'm also tracking that beam here because another difference is that rather than firing a projectile, which means we just create it and fire it and then we're done with it, we don't want to keep creating beams. That would be awful. We want to have one beam. So if we are a beam weapon, then what we do is we have this variable called beam that we just have uninitialized. It's just set to null right now. So it says will be set in ready if used. So if we go to ready, you can see we're doing a check here. Hey, if our projectile type is beam, then we're going to create our projectile as soon as we are created. We're going to instance it. So we already made this variable earlier so we can always track it. We're setting our beam damage per second because I made my own special beam scene. And we're just setting that as damage minimum because minimum and maximum should be the same, so we don't have to randomize any range. And then I'm setting my beam ship owner to be the ship owner. Again, we're passing that down through several nodes so that we don't collide with our ship. And then I'm adding that beam as a child to my weapon. So the weapon spawns the beam, and by default, the beam is like invisible. It's not enabled until I fire it. So that was another obstacle that I faced, was that how I was firing weapons is that from my ship. So if I go to ship and I go to the fire weapons function, what I'm doing here is I'm going through all of my weapons and I'm calling my weapon fire weapon function. Now, let's look at the fire weapon function here. So what is this doing? Well, this is making sure that a lot of this code is still the same. I'm not going to go over it because it was so long ago, and honestly, I think this whole thing probably needs to be redone. But I just added something here that says, hey, am I a beam weapon? So I'm saying, hey, is my projectile type a beam? If we are, then I have these two variables called firing timer and firing max. Because what this fire weapon does is that, so the whole time that I'm holding down spacebar, every frame, ship is going through every weapon and it's calling fire weapon. And we're saying, hey, are we our own type? If not, do nothing. If we don't have any ammo, do nothing. And then before, fire counter was basically my cooldown. So say if I'm running at 120 frames per second, I don't want to fire 120 projectiles in a single second. Maybe I only want to fire like 2 rounds per second. So I have a counter that is handling the cooldown for firing projectiles. Well, beams don't have that. You're either firing or you're not. And then so how this worked is that since I was just creating these projectiles, so you can see here I'm creating I'm instancing my projectile pack scene. I'm setting the a ship inertia. I've already gone over that before. I'm again setting ship owner so our projectile can make sure that we're not hitting ourself. Setting our damage, setting the rotation, and we're adding it to our main scene. That way our movement doesn't influence it. So we're just adding it to the main scene directly. We're setting the global position, and then we're also specifying what enemies it should be able to hit. Now that I look at this, because I made that change a while ago to where projectiles only hit enemies, I probably don't even need this whole ship owner thing anymore. At least for projectiles. Because, yeah. So, side note. And it's playing the sound of it firing, and it's decreasing ammo if it fired it. And we're resetting our cooldown. So that was how projectile stuff is working before. Now, if we're a beam, we're setting our firing timer, which is another variable that I made. Because if I'm holding down spacebar, I want to make sure that our beam is firing. But I don't have anything in place to detect when I'm not pressing spacebar anymore, or if I'm not firing anymore. And so my solution to that was to make like a little firing timer that decreases every frame, and if it hasn't been refreshed, it will just automatically set is firing and enabled to be false. So that way So that way it works. Now, I'm also setting the enemies of the beam every frame, which could be costly, especially if you're in a big battle and you have a ton of enemies, because it's constantly copying over this array. So I need to do, and there we go. To do, find a more efficient way of doing this. So I think I probably just have to use signals and then, you know, emit a signal whenever enemies changes, and then make sure that signal is connected to everything that needs to use the ship's enemies. So I'll probably have to refactor that to use signals. But for right now, this is how I cobbled it together. And then we're returning early if we are a beam, because if we're a beam, we don't have to do any of this other stuff here. So let's take a look at our beam code. So if we go to bluebeam.gd here, so this is my beam I threw together. Let's take a look at the actual scene itself. So the scene is, I have a raycast 2D, and then I have a line 2D. So I just set the line 2D to, you know, have a modulation property here. So I set that to be raw, and I cranked it up so that it's a different blue kind of color. And yeah, so let's see. I should have done self-modulate now that I think about it. Interesting. Anyway, I'm going to leave that the way it is right now. So let's take a look at our thing here. So we have ship owner. Make sure we're not shooting our own ship. We have enemies, so we can collide. We have our damage per second that we're going to deal. And then we have a is firing variable, which we also have a set get thing here, so I can specify a setter. I don't need a getter for this, so I didn't specify one. But this setter allows me to, whenever we call this, so whenever we call it set is firing is called, it's we're making sure that we're determining if the value changed. If it did change, update the value. And were we trying to fire or stop firing? So if we are trying to fire, then what we're doing is we're setting our cast to property of our raycast 2D to point out as far as we can to our maximum range that we have specified. And then we're setting our line 2D to be visible. And then with a line 2D, you can specify multiple points of where you want to draw that line. Well, since my use case here, I'm only drawing point A to point B, point 0, because again, arrays are 0 indexed, is the root position. So it's the home position. So point 0 is going to be basically a vector 2 of 0 is effectively what it is. So 0, 0. So I'm setting my second point, which is points 1 here. I'm setting that to equal cast 2. So my raycast 2D is going out far, and then my actual line, which is visually what you see in the game, that's also going out to be that far. Now there's a lot of other stuff that I can do here, especially with like particle effects, to make like a origin area where it's like bursting forth, and then I can add particle effects on the beam itself, and then I can also add particle effects at the other end where the beam is actually impacting stuff. I haven't done that yet, but I'm going to. I was caught up playing with getting this to work. So that's what we're doing. So now, another fun thing to note is that raycast 2D prefers to use physics process. So even though I'm not using any physics nodes, so I'm not using any kinematic body 2D or anything like that, all of my collisions have been done with area 2D. And what you can do is on your raycast 2D, under collide with, you can set it to collide with areas. So because all of my stuff that I want to collide with is using areas, I set that to on. And then in the physics process here, I'm just saying, hey, if we are firing, I want you to check collision. So I made this function called check collision. I'm passing in delta, which is, again, the time elapsed since last frame. And what I'm doing is I'm checking I'm basically checking to see if we're colliding with anything, and if we are colliding with in area 2D, I'm just going through a bunch of validation criteria to make sure that I'm actually colliding with something I want to do damage to. So, if we're not colliding at all, then I'm just making sure that our beam endpoint is set to our max range. So that's what I'm doing there. So then I have this nice big comment here that explains what needs to happen. So if we haven't returned yet, it means that we are colliding with something. So we'll have to do some fancy work here to detect if we're colliding with multiple things. Because all the examples I saw for Raycast 2D, it was only handling the very first collision. I think in maybe Godot 4, I think that there is support for handling multiple collisions out of the box. With Raycast 2D, I'm not sure. I haven't looked into it, but I know that for Godot 3.4, which is what I'm using, if you do Git Collider, there is no Git Colliders. It doesn't give you everything that you are colliding with. It only gives you the very first thing you are colliding with. So, say for example, if I'm right here and my enemy is right here, and there's like another ship that's in between us that also has an area 2D, but they're not a enemy. If I'm trying to shoot them with a laser beam, my laser was stopping right there instead of hitting my actual enemy. So what I'm doing is I have to use a while loop to determine if we're colliding. We'll check the collider, validate it against our validation criteria, and then if it doesn't meet it, we're going to add it to the exception list, because with a Raycast 2D, you can add things as an exception to make sure that it doesn't collide with it. So, and then once we add it as a exception, we can refresh the Raycast, and it will do it again. So let's go through that logic here. So we're initializing a empty array here called colliders, and I'm saying while is colliding. Now while loops are pretty dangerous because they're very easy for you to introduce like memory leaks, or even worse, just your game being frozen if it's stuck in an endless loop. So I had to be careful with that, but I saw this on a Godot engine forum post, and this was the solution that they did, and I just modified it to add my own stuff. So we're just saying, hey, are we colliding? So while we are colliding, we are going to keep running everything in this loop. So let's talk about what we're doing. So first things first, we are getting the object that we are colliding with. So we're doing git collider. Before we do any validation with that, we're just going to add that to our colliders array. So then we're going through our validation criteria. We are ensuring that the collider is in area 2D. So if it's not in area 2D, we're going to add it as an exception. We're going to set our beam endpoint to be max range. We don't want our endpoint to stop at this thing that we don't really want to collide with, so I'm making that my beam endpoint is going to be max range. This is a custom function I made. All it does is it just sets cast. It basically just makes your cast 2 and your line 2D where to the specified magnitude, basically to the specified position. So the position we're specifying here, again, cast 2 is a vector 2. We're normalizing it, and then we're scaling it by our max range. So we're passing in that position. And then once we set our beam, we're going to force the Raycast to update, and then we're going to continue iteration, which is going to skip the rest of this stuff. It's going to go back up here to say while is colliding. So again, since we added that previous collider to the exception list, we're not going to collide with that anymore. So if it's going to check the next thing that it's colliding with, and then we're going to run through again. We're going to run through all of our criteria until something is not met, and then we're just going to add it as an exception, reset our Raycast, and then we're going to force the Raycast to update. So that's the logic there of how that works. Now let's get into what my validation criteria is. So if we're not colliding with area 2D, reset. If we are colliding with an area 2D, is the owner of that area 2D still a valid instance? Now, this case should ideally never fire, but I just want to be safe. So if it's not a valid instance, then we don't have anything that we're going to really collide with. So again, add exception, force update. Are we colliding with another ship? So I have a to-do here to utilize collidable node types array, which I added up top over here. So I have this collidable node types, and you can see I have my ship type already here. I was doing some forward thinking because I'm going to be implementing asteroids soon, and I want projectiles to always collide, like projectiles and beams to always collide with asteroids. So I was doing some forward thinking there, but I was just modifying existing logic. So right now the only thing I'm colliding with is if it's a ship, and I'm checking that by seeing it if it is in group ships. So I could probably just say, like, if collider owner is ship, I could do it that way, but this is how I was checking it for my projectiles earlier, so I just copied and pasted code and modified it. So I've got that to do there, so I will adjust that as I get farther along. So, not a ship, refresh ray, add exception, refresh ray, and continue. Next, we're making sure that we're not colliding with ourself. Again, ship owner. I copied this from original projectile code, and I probably don't even have to have this because we're also checking to make sure that, hey, is the collider owner in our enemies list? We should never be in our own enemies list. So this is really a superfluous check that I probably shouldn't even have to do, but I've got it in here now because I've got it working. I'm just going to leave it for now. I'm going to throw a to-do on here though. Do we even need to check this anymore since we are checking enemy lists? So next check is making sure that the thing we're colliding with is actually part of my enemies list. If it's not, again, add exception, reset, and force update. So by this point, if we haven't returned yet, if we haven't skipped iteration, which is what continue does, it just skips to the next iteration, then it means that we are colliding with an enemy ship. So we can call their take damage function. So if we look on ship, we have a take damage function here, which again just validates that the attacker is still accurate. We reset shield cooldown, and then I had to add another argument here. So I had to add play sound as a parameter, and I defaulted it to be true, which is what it was doing previously, because I don't want to play a sound every time my beam does damage. Because again, a projectile, once it hits, it deals the damage and then destroys itself. With a beam, it's constantly hitting. It's just constantly going in, and you're doing like damage per second. So for that, I had to modify my take damage function on the ship to only play sound if we have it set. Because what was happening is it was playing the shield impact sound like 120 times a second, and that sounded awful. It was not good. So I still have to work out how I'm going to handle beam sounds, so I still have a to-do on there, but I think that's going to be handled on the beam itself. I figure I'll just play a sound, a looping sound, if the beam is emitting, and if it's not, we just don't play that sound. So I think that should be okay. And then I have a special case here to where we're playing the sound anyway for our shield down. So this is when our shield absorbs partial damage, and then our hit points absorb the rest, because it plays a specific sound of your shield going down. Regardless of if I have play sound set to true or not, it's going to play that sound. So yeah, so beam is calling that take damage, and we're just setting it to not play a sound. So after we're doing that, we're also setting our beam endpoint to be the get collision point. Now, get collision point of a raycast 2D is a global position. So since we've been working everything in local position, we have to do a toLocal function here, which is built in, thankfully. And so we're just setting our beam endpoint to be where we collided with something. So that's the functionality you saw, to where you can see my beam is going max range right now, which I think is set to like 700. So it's shooting as far as it can. And then if a ship decides to spawn here, I'm going to light it up. Here we go. So I'm going to shoot this ship. And let me see here. And you can see like the beam goes to where I am colliding with it. So it doesn't go past it, doesn't go through it. It goes to exactly to where I am colliding with it. So that's what that does there. We're setting our beam. And then what we're doing is we're breaking out of the loop. If we've already collided and dealt damage, then we don't need to keep looping. So we're going to break out of that loop, and then we're going to reset our exceptions. So after we've gone through and we kept looping through every collision, adding it as an exception. Once we're done, we're gonna iterate through every exception that we added in our colliders array, and we're gonna go through and we're gonna remove those so that we can double check them next time. Because, well, I wonder if I should do that. I should, because there's a chance to where a ship might be added to exceptions, and then you might be added to the enemies, and you won't have a way of getting that again. So we have to remove the exceptions every time. So that's what we're doing there. And again, you could see set beam endpoint. It's just taking in a position, a vector 2, and we're setting our cast 2 to be that, and we're setting our line, our point B of that line, to be the same as cast 2. So that's all that's doing. That's how my beam is working. I'm not sure how well this is going to work when I start adding laser beams on a lot of ships. We start doing lots of combat, because this to me seems like it's a very intensive process, especially if we're having to loop through, you know, if there's a big pile of ships and I'm emitting a laser beam trying to shoot one enemy. It's having to constantly iterate through every single one of those other ships that might be in the way, and adding it as an exception, and then removing it from exceptions when we're done. This seems like a pretty taxing process. So I might need to use laser beams sparingly. But yeah, that's how I made beams work. I hope that was helpful. So laser beams done. And the last thing I did was I set my project settings to keep the 1920 by 1080 aspect ratio, because I want to start playing in full screen. And what was happening before was that, so for example, like all of my UI and stuff has been designed around 1920 by 1080. So all this stuff here fits perfect. If I went bigger without setting that, what it would do is it would just shrink everything down super small. So if someone was playing on a big 4K monitor, I don't know what the hell you expect from a game that's got crappy little hand-drawn pixel art, but it's not like you're going to need a 4090 with like ray tracing to run my damn game. So I'm just going to cap it at 1920 by 1080, and it will scale to your screen, so it will be as big as you want. So right now I have a 1440p monitor, but right now everything is capped at 1080p on here. So you can see like these black bars. It's keeping the aspect ratio. Sorry if you're playing on an ultra wide monitor. You're gonna have black bars, because I don't really have a great way that I know of right now to handle UI to make everything nice, and that's just a bad part on myself as a developer. I don't know how to do that, but I do know how to keep everything capped and look good, and so I can force it to always be 1920, and even if you go smaller. So if I want to resize my window to be super tiny, I can still go through and I can still play my game, even though the mouse cursor is still the same size. But I can still play on a super tiny resolution, or I can play big. It doesn't matter. So I set that in the project settings. So let's go to project settings, and I just did a search for stretch, which is in the window section. So window, there's a whole stretch area here. So I set the mode to be 2D. By default, it is disabled. And then I set the aspect ratio to keep, which by default was ignore. So that's what I did there. And I think it looks pretty good. And I also started adding, I wanted to like make it full screen too. Where's my ready function? Oh, okay, I removed it. So I wanted to make it go full screen when you run the game, and I was able to do that, but I don't have a way to exit the game currently through the in-game menu. So I kept having to alt tab and then close the game that way, which is not ideal, but it was super immersive having it full screen. Like, I've been running it as like a little window here the entire time, just having a, you know, a fun little time playing my neat little game. But when I made it full screen, you know, without like actual, not like real full screen, not windowed, yeah, super immersive. So I was excited about that, and yeah. So that's what I got for you. That's what I've done since last update. I figured I got a working laser, which is a really big thing, and I also got lighting and glow working. So I figured those three things could easily probably fill an hour of stuff. So I don't want to have, like, you know, 5-hour-long devlogs, which will probably be a problem if I just keep going and going and going and not make a devlog. So just a small update about those three things. And yeah, I'll see you in the next devlog. Thank you so much for watching.